Is David Rockefeller raising money to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem? There are lots of people who think so. I just received an article that was posted on WorldNet Daily where a story has been circulating in Christian circles. Of course, it says the story spread virally through the evangelical Christian blogosphere that a Rockefeller is raising capital to rebuild the Jewish temple. The release filed by MarketWire and republished at CNNmoney.com claims Supreme David Rockefeller is director of a company, Kinty Holdings Group, which is working with a Jewish temple organization to rebuild the third temple. And the story goes on to say the original Rockefeller press release about rebuilding the third temple has been spreading like wildfire on Christian websites and blogs. Now, the story has turned out to be a hoax, but the point I'm trying to make with this is this is just typical of what goes on in eschatological circles today. Something like a story like this comes out there, and immediately Christians, start, blogging about how this is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And again, I get chastised. I get nasty emails from people. I get long emails from people. I get responses on American Vision's website when I write an article. It's amazing how poorly the arguments are for this type of claim. Actually, the New Testament doesn't say a thing about a rebuilt temple. Not a single word anywhere in the New Testament will you find any talk about a rebuilt temple. Now, people will go to Matthew chapter 24, the abomination of desolation, in verse 15, but the book of Matthew's Gospel, Mark, and Luke's Gospel on the Olivet Discourse, the temple was still standing when Jesus gave that prophecy. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation, there's an audience reference to that particular generation, not some future generation, in spite of the way some people try to argue the use of the second person plural. Well, look, picked up the second person plural at verse 33 in Matthew chapter 24. Jesus says, when you see these things, and work it all the way back through chapter 24, through 23, through 22 and 21, and it's obvious that Jesus is talking about that particular generation, not a future generation. Then they go to Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, and you will find there they say, see, this is talking about a rebuilt temple. It's the 70th week of Daniel. There's nothing in there that says anything about a rebuilt temple. Any talk about the temple in there, it's obviously the temple that was torn down from the Babylonian captivity. The rebuilt temple that's being spoken of there is the rebuilt temple after the exile, which in fact the temple was rebuilt. It's not talking about a distant rebuilt temple. It's not skipping over that rebuilt temple and then speaking about another rebuilt temple. Then you have to separate that 70th week from the 69th week and put a gap of nearly 2,000 years in it in order to make it work. Now this is really, I've called it silly putty exegesis in the extreme. Then they say, oh, you go to 2 Thessalonians 2, the Antichrist has to take his seat in the temple. Well, the word Antichrist isn't being used here, but let's assume that it is. John in 1 John chapter 2, verse 18 talks about Antichrist as a present reality, not something that's going to take place in the future. In fact, the rise of many Antichrists in John's day was evidence, according to John, that in fact that these events were soon to take place. And so the 2 Thessalonians passage, if you go back and look at 2 Thessalonians 2, it's very clear there that the temple was still standing. This isn't a discussion of the rapture like Tim LaHaye and others say. It's the episynagoge. It's the gathering together of the people of God. And that word means to gather earthly people on earth. It doesn't mean to take people off the earth. The word episynagoge, to gather together, doesn't mean to take people to heaven. The people in 2 Thessalonians 2 believed that they had received a letter from the Apostle Paul that the day of the Lord had already taken place. Well, if the day of the Lord is either the rapture or the second coming, which is an event they say happens after the 7-year tribulation period. How in the world would Paul have sent them a letter telling them that that event had already taken place if he had in fact been taken to heaven in the rapture or when Jesus returns at the end of the 7-year period? It makes no sense at all. The man of lawlessness was already in the world. Paul says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. You know what restrains him now. Again, this is just another series of speculative prophetic thinking. You go to the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. The temple is still standing. John is told to measure the temple, which is a prime indication that the book of Revelation was written prior to its destruction in AD 70. That's why words like near and shortly and quickly are used in the book of Revelation. But what gets me about all of this is that there are Christians out there who are so caught up in what I've described as last days madness that they will latch on to anything related to Bible prophecy, and they will throw all intellectual curiosity and any intellectual integrity out the window by just picking it up and just sending it out there and see, boy, this is all an indication that the end is going to take place. In fact, if you actually study dispensational premillennial doctrine, they will tell you that there are no signs prior to the rapture that has any indication that the rapture is on the horizon. Nothing at all. So even if the temple were to be rebuilt, the fact that Jerusalem is in the land, according to really traditional dispensational thinking, none of that has anything to do with Bible prophecy today. Page Patterson, in a debate I had with him back in 1991 on a Dallas, Texas radio station, he said that the Jews are going to have to be thrown out of the land again in order to be brought back believing. This has been part of a big debate over Israel and Bible prophecy. Is modern day Israel fulfillment of Bible prophecy? Page Patterson, who's a dispensationalist, says, well, no, because this is not believing Israel. You go through the Old Testament and you will see that when Israel comes back to the land after the exile under the Babylonians, that you see there that they come back believing, they came back repenting. So there is a huge amount of a confusion out there regarding Bible prophecy, and things like this that circulate on the internet and is picked up by Christians in the area of eschatology just fuel this frenzy. And then we at American Vision are the ones who end up getting criticized because we point these things out. We show, look, take a peek at the text of Scripture. Study it very closely. The claim by dispensationalists that people like me, don't interpret the Bible literally is nonsense. I'm still waiting for somebody from the dispensational camp to tell me where in the New Testament is there any mention of a rebuilt temple. There isn't one. They even admit there isn't one. I have a whole article on this, quoting their own people where they maintain that there is no verse in the New Testament that says there's going to be a rebuilt temple. Where is there a verse in the New Testament that says anything about Israel returning to the land? Not a single verse in the New Testament says anything about that. Where in Revelation chapter 20 do you find Jesus reigning on the earth? It says nothing about that. Where does it say that David's throne is going to be set on the earth in Revelation 20? It says nothing about it. A temple being built, nothing about it. All of these things that modern day dispensationalists who claim to interpret the Bible literally claim are going to happen, you won't find anything in the New Testament about it. In order for them to get this particular scenario to work the way they need it to work, they have to put a gap between the 69th and 70th week of Daniel, and then they have to extract from that their dispensational system in order to make it work. And yet there's nothing in the book of in Daniel chapter 9 that says anything about a gap between the 69th and 70th week. The 70th week of Daniel is based upon the 70 years of captivity. There's no gap at the 70 years of captivity. There's no gap in Daniel's 70 weeks of years. So stay away from speculative eschatology and study the Scriptures on your own and let Scripture interpret Scripture.
The Gary DeMar Show is brought to you by American Vision. Shop at AmericanVision.com to support the show.